Cesar, what are discovery curves?
Discovery curves are a very simple diagram of showing everything that you might discover in the lifetime of a project, a feature build, any endeavor, building a product, and plotting that over time. So let's say that 100% of everything you're ever going to learn is that mark. You want to know how quickly can you get to that level of discovery.
So why is this valuable to an executive managing, say, a product portfolio or an engineering team?
So I can probably explain that best with an actual example that describes the use of this technique, this tool, with the strongest agile skeptic that I think I've ever worked with. I used it to help her describe how she perceived information was discovered on every project in her organization. First thing that this client did was divide the period of time in several phases, which already was a strong indicator how things might be working there, and she labeled them. So that was plan, there was build, there was a short period of testing, and then there was a go, no-go decision, after which the product would be made available but not used, and then eventually the product would be in use. So when thinking through how information was discovered in this process, one of the first things that came up with was for software capitalization rules, the 75, in some cases 95% certainty is assumed to be also the 75 or 95% discovery of all of the information that is needed, and that all happens up front. So if we say that's maybe 90%, my client drew a straight line of discovery from time 0 to this was about 6 months at this point. So the first 6 months, some team, normally on the business side, could be marketing, could be sales, could be product strategy, would be attempting to discover everything that is needed to write specs for a team to then build some software. Now, if you're already at a perceived 90% or so by this time, then it is further assumed, or it was in that particular case, that the specifications are essentially flawless. So all that the build team has to do, software developers, testers, etc., is there's no learning required. So there's a flat line. She drew a flat line, literally, right there. And then went on to say, well, QA process actually catches out some of the bugs and other defects that the software developers left in. And then there's a go, no-go decision, which invariably would actually be go, hardly ever no-go. At which point, and this I agreed with her, there's no learning happening because the software is made available, but it's not used by anybody until some other third party or client turns it on. So I chose not to challenge any of this. It was very useful information to capture how she perceived discovery happening on projects in her organization. But then she carried on, and she said, well, and then what happens is that we go live. I mean, truly live. With the first set of users, or maybe there is a barrage of a lot of users, and then this happens. And that was very interesting to me, because by following this model, it allowed me to ask, well, if that's 100% of all the discovery that was ever going to happen, what level is that? She actually went off the chart and almost drew on the wall. And she thought about it for a moment. And this was very useful for her to realize that this was merely a perception, and that she knew what the reality was. So, strike that. That is not 100% or 90% at all. 100% is up here, or perhaps even beyond. Then she started to describe what really happens. So what really happens, choose a different color for this, is that the plan team continues to learn. So it was already acknowledged that this could not be 90% because her direct experience was that learning continued. So I asked, how does that learning make it back into how do the specs get updated, how does the team benefit and change direction based on that learning. She said, well, if this is a 6-month build period, typically what happens is that every 2 to 3 months we have a design review. So any learning that happens gets injected back into that process. There's literally contract negotiation or renegotiation that needs to happen. So I asked, okay, so that is a feedback loop of communication between the plan team and the build team. And she said, no, it's not a feedback loop, it's a feed forward. We're actually dropping in learning that this team captures. And I asked, well, how do you capture the learning made by the team who's got their hands dirty, their sleeves rolled up, and touching and constructing that product? And she said, we don't. So I kept on asking and exploring this logic. And I said, well, what if I could give you a team that could do that? What if I could give you a team that required that much upfront learning, upfront discovery, or upfront planning as it's more commonly known, and then could benefit from that and learn at this rate and get pretty close to that 100% of discovery, so that when you did go live with your users, the gap between what you learn once you're in market and what you've learned during the construction was maybe only as much as that. She said, that would be great. We just don't have such teams. Well, it might be more than just getting the right team. It might be about how you communicate with the team. So if you were to work with such a team, would you communicate with them every 2 to 3 months, or would that be any different? Well, I'd probably communicate halfway through, so that's kind of every month. And actually, no, I'd probably communicate even more frequently than that. I might, and she drew these lines. I might communicate every couple of weeks, at which point, essentially, my work was done. After introducing her and having her exposed to Agile teams for about 6 months prior to this conversation, she was essentially drawing iterations on this diagram. So it was transformative, and it was very useful for her as a senior director to understand what the process was and what was important in the process of software development. So this is the best example that I think carries a particularly bad example in terms of how the organization was set up, but it's a really good example of how DiscoveryCurves as a model can help drive the conversation and completely shift the thinking model.
Excellent. Next, Cesar.